Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
How's everybody doing on this frosty Sabbath evening? I mean, frosty.
Well, it's spitting snow out here, and I kept looking out at Main Street there, and I think I saw one kid trick or treating out of the whole evening.
No,
So
well,
I think that's
he's
because
earning it tonight. I'll tell you, he's earning it 'cause it's cold, and it's real cold. So tonight we're going to discuss. Let's see, we're going to talk about our role as a Christian and being a good Samaritan and loving our neighbor and how to set examples and to be lights for others in the world. So why don't you take us out and start us out?
Okay, this is called the oldest profession. Don't get excited.
Oh,
A doctor, an architect, and a computer scientist were arguing about whose profession was the oldest. In the course of their arguments, they went all the way back to the Garden of Eden. The doctor said the medical profession is clearly the oldest. Eve was made from Adam's rib. That was an incredible surgical feat. The architect said, wait a minute. He didn't agree. But if you look at the garden itself, in the beginning there was chaos and void. And out of that chaos and void, God created the garden. That is an art, and the world. That's an architectural feat. The computer scientist says, he listened to all this and he said, yes, but where do you think the chaos came from? The computer viruses. You're supposed to lift the box up. I'll give you another joke. That one, you all didn't get that one fast enough. Where did the chaos come from? Okay, this is the Doofuses Go Fishing. A year after Mrs. Doofus' wife pleaded with him to take her fishing, she kept pleading, so one day he took her fishing to the nearby lake. They had not been fishing long when almost as fast as they would cast in there, they'd pull out a fish. They throw a line, pull out a fish, throw a line, pull out a fish. He says, you're good luck, honey. I'm going to take you fishing the next time we go. If you'll just mark the spot where we caught all these fish, we'll go home. She said, I've got a spot mark, so they go home. So he asked her, where is the fishing spot? She says, well, I put a big X on the side of the boat, right down closest to the water. He said, sweet thing, that's about the dumbest thing I've ever seen you do. Don't you know that it won't work? How do you know we're going to get the same boat next time?
that was somebody you knew.
Okay, most of you know the story of the Good Samaritan, so we'll just kind of summarize it. But in the Good Samaritan story, Luke 10:25-37, one of the Jewish law experts usually they're attempting to trip Christ up, asked him about the law and what was the greatest thing in the law. And of course, both of them realized Leviticus 19:18 and Deuteronomy 6:5 basically says that you to love God with all your heart and all your mind, and you're supposed to love your neighbor. So actually, the first four commandments tell us how to love God. Because most people wonder, well, how do you love God? God tells you, don't put anything in front of God, don't misuse His name, no idols, and keep His Sabbath, not one that the sun god or people have made up. Use the time that He made holy to spend time with Him. And of course, the last six are pretty obvious: don't steal, cheat, and lie, etc. But let's go to Matthew 22, because I think it will help put the law of God in a context that I think is helpful. Matthew 22:34. I'm going to read it. Matthew 22. We'll pick it up in verse 34. But when the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, every time they tried to ask Christ a tricky question, he turned it on them and made them look bad. So they thought they would take their whack at it. Then one of them, which was a lawyer, obviously, Jewish lawyers are pretty clever, needless to say, so he asked him a question, tempting him and saying, Master, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And they had, no matter which one you said, they had a little argument. Well, why didn't you say that one? What about, no, it was one of these trap questions. Anything you said, they'd come back, well, you didn't say. But of course, Christ understood the law at a level that, far exceeded theirs. Jesus said to them, verse 37, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And of course, they knew the scriptures in Leviticus 19:18 and Deuteronomy 5. So what were they going to say? It's certainly in the Bible. This is the first and great commandment. The second is like unto it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. What could they possibly say? But then we go to the question they asked him about. They came back and said, well, who is our neighbor? It was kind of like a lawyer's clever way of getting around the question. So Christ in Luke tells the story of the Good Samaritan. Most people are familiar with it, but I'll just summarize it real briefly. I assume most people are familiar. That a man is robbed and he's laying on the roadside bleeding and wounded. Both a priest and a Levi, who are members, high-ranking members of the Jewish clergy, they find reasons to avoid him, and they go across the street, and they don't help him. And you could argue that human nature is such you can always find an excuse not to help someone. And then the despised Samaritan, they were half-breeds who were disliked by the Jews, and they felt they had a counterfeit religion. So they really despised the Samaritan. The Samaritan helped the man, took him to an inn, and really did a great job on him. So Christ said to the lawyer, well, okay, so who is your neighbor? And you realize that story made the point that anyone can be your neighbor, regardless of their nationality. That was a point that he made, and I think the Jewish leadership, especially in the time of Christ, needed that message. So I'm going to turn over to Gary now, who's going to discuss a little bit more of that issue.
Yes, the Jewish people in those days kept an exclusivity. They didn't want any outsiders or other people around. And from Acts 10 and verse 28, it demonstrates that. It says, and he said unto them, you know that it is a thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or to come unto one another nation. But God has showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean. A lot of people use that scripture for other purposes. They try to spin it. But there's a little anecdote here that I want to throw in. You all probably know who Lee Iacocca is. He was an official with the Ford Motor Company first. Matter of fact, he designed the Mustang, which is still Ford Motor Company's mainstay. He did all that before he went to Chrysler. But he once made this statement, once in Detroit at one of his public speeches. He said, this auto business is a tough business. People are not happy just to succeed. They want you to fail. That's everybody took note of what he said. Of course, that was Lee Iacocca, but that was kind of a startling statement about man's natural carnal proclivity toward each other, toward his neighbors, The question that comes to my mind when I started thinking about all this was, how do you love your neighbor? Of course, we all have our probably opinion of that. In the Detroit ICG, we have a project going that we try to do each year of filling up backpacks with living essentials for distribution to needy people, especially this time of the year because it's starting to get cold, and there are people out there who may not have a warm place to go or enough food in their stomach. That's one of the reasons, one of the things that we as a group try to do to express our love for these other people. Our neighbors have the same desires and needs that we have. You know, just as we get hungry, so do our neighbors, whether they have the means to eat or not. How many people do you know or do you know about that cannot provide essential food for themselves or their families? And the distress that may come on because they lost their job, who knows, or they may be sick. If we have food, if we have the ability to share some of the things we have, that is a way to love your neighbor. And the same thing applies to other basic needs such as shelter and clothing, and we need to learn to share our riches as much as we possibly can. What God gives us, we should be willing to share with our neighbors. What are other ways that we can manifest true Christian love towards our neighbor? Are you ever aware of someone who has been injured or been in an accident or has become sick and is physically in pain? You know someone who's suffering from things like that, or do you know anyone who has by any means come to this distress or discomfort? Their physical needs may already be taken care of, but their spiritual needs are something that we need to think about, that God expects us to think about and to care about and to try to comfort them and solace them. Because when we comfort others and we give of our hearts, we are expressing God's love through us, through ourselves. And we all need the love of God expressed to us. And so it is our position, it is our place in life as Christians to try to express the same love that we would need ourselves to others. And when by the same token, when our neighbor is honored or is appointed some office or rewarded for some accomplishment, that should honor us as well because we have that feeling towards them. We should feel honored. This is all really quite a contrast to what Lee Iacocca said, and if he were here right now, I'm not sure he would agree with me, but trials and tests are common in all our lives. We have trials and so do our neighbors. While Christ was undergoing the trial of his life, he was praying for Peter. As he was undergoing that worst possible time in his life, his concern was for Peter, who was a key disciple that Satan wanted to destroy, and yet Christ himself was on the verge of being sacrificed. What a selfless, neighborly love that was. And Christ instructed Peter, "Art converted, strengthen thy brethren, give it to your brethren." That's the type of love that we need to manifest and give to our brothers. The godly perspective is that we must want the very best for our neighbor as well as for ourselves. The best for our neighbor is that he or she can also ultimately become a member of the family of God. So if we can keep this perspective, then we are going to be determined not to hurt or harm or be in competition with our neighbor. We will not be in competition with him or her. So the question.
Something.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, what do you think about calling to some people, if nothing else, just calling them on the phone to encourage them?
I would say that if there's a time in your life that you would like to receive a call from someone and be encouraged, then that's exactly what you should do.
That and volunteering. I mean, part of it is visiting people in a hospital or when they're sick. I mean, that's part of it. Even if you, I don't know, I imagine even if you don't know them all that well. I mean, I know that people get a lot of satisfaction out of volunteering in hospitals and visiting people who are in homes and things and just giving them somebody else to talk to and smile at.
Yeah, you don't have to know them. That's not required to have godly love for them. But the question that the lawyer asked Jesus is, who is thy neighbor? I guess that's what we were going after. Of course, Jesus demonstrated that with the Samaritan woman, that neighbors are not an exclusive, but rather they are an inclusive group of humanity. And we need to realize that this group includes some that we may not like, we may not care to be around, that we may actually be repulsed by, such as Homosexuals, their actions are repulsive to us, but they are a part of humanity, such as murderers and drunkards, and well, even Democrats, and people that we just don't seem to have much use for, but they are part of that group, and I see Ken smiling there. But there is, I looked and looked, and there is no specific definition that qualifies neighbor, but I did see one answer that one man offered, and he said, your neighbor is anyone who is not you. That person is then your neighbor. Now, I've always believed and always said that you don't have to particularly like someone to love them. You can love them without liking them, if you know what I mean. You can want what is right for them. You can hope that they someday come to understand the truth. Some people truly are, just as Lee Iacocca stated, are just a pain in the neck. They're just, and maybe some other strategic places. But even within the church, I hate to say that, but there are some people who just always seem miserable and just always want to be miserable and be in the way. But you can still love them in God's way. You don't have to like them to love them. God actually puts himself in the place of our neighbor. Whatever we do to our neighbor, we're actually doing to God. If you can keep that in mind, that perspective in mind, it makes it easier to work with it. Do we always consider, as we deal with another human being, that we are doing to God whatever we do to that person? This knowledge should have a big impact on us when we consider our relationship with our neighbor, as I said. In addition, God says, if a man say, I love God, and yet he hateth his brother, he is a liar. For he that loveth not his brother, whom he hath seen, how can he love God then, who he hath not seen? And this commandment we have from him, that he who loveth God loveth his brother also. So we need to begin to see the importance that God places on relationships between human beings who are made in his likeness. Every human being, every single human being is a potential member of the God family. Everyone has that potential. And we should not do anything to deter our neighbor from fulfilling God's purpose in his particular life. This must be the underlying idea upon which we need to base our thoughts and our deeds and our regards towards our neighbor. And as I said, I like that the answer the one fellow gave. Your neighbor is anyone who you are not. And Christ taught, as ye would that men should do to you, you do also to them likewise. And the Apostle John wrote, we know that we have passed from death unto life because we love the brethren. I know I got a little long-winded there.
By the way, I wanted to go back to Acts 10:28 for just a second. When you read that it was unlawful, when you read the context, for Jews to associate with Gentiles, eat dinner with them and all that, that was a Jewish rule. You'll think, well, did they get that out of the Bible? When you go to Leviticus 19:33, the next couple of verses, it said they should not vex a stranger, and that they should be nice to the strangers because they were slaves in Egypt. The point I'm getting at is that chapter, by the way, people use that chapter to prove you can eat pork. No, what he's saying is don't call people unclean. He's not cleaning pork up. God's not contradicting his own law. But the Jews were wrong in that attitude that they had. And I think that's part of what Christ was trying to tell them, that they were wrong in that regard. Although the Bible also says, though, there should be one law for everybody in the country, the Israelites and the strangers. And that's one of the problems in America today, the balkanization of America. That is, you have groups of people, and it's worse in Europe than it is here, but it could get bad here too, who live under a different set of laws and have a different set of loyalties than do the other people. Like you got little chunks of, I don't want to name any nationality or religion because it'll look like I'm putting them down, but I think there are zones in Europe, especially, where if you're not of a certain religion, you best stay out of there. And if you do go in there, you don't go by the laws of that European nation. You go by the Sharia law, and that's the balkanizing of the country, and that's not what God wants. We should all live under the same law. But you're supposed to be nice to strangers. And they should all be part of cooperating together.
Yeah, I would like to say, going back to Gary, just taking the opposite road on something. Being nice to somebody, another way to look at this is you don't know what that person's going through in their life. He may be having some real struggles, health issues, lost a family member or whatever, and a kind word or just any kind of act from you may make a big difference in his day by just going that extra step. Because you don't know. There's a saying that my karate teacher used to tell me. He says, you never mess with a crying man. If that guy's crying, you better leave him alone. Something's the problem there. So you don't know. People may be hurting really badly inside, and a kind word or just a little gesture may make a big difference in their life.
And just want to add to that, even when it's difficult, even when you don't think they got it coming. Here's an example. Let's say Bob backs out of his driveway and he runs over the garbage can, and then he goes to get out of a car to move the garbage can. He spills his coffee on him, and then he's driving to work. He gets cut off in traffic, and almost gets in a wreck. He gets caught by a train, and then when he gets to the office, he goes to grab the coffee pot, and the coffee pot's empty, and he starts screaming and cussing, and he throws the coffee pot down, saying, "Why didn't anybody make coffee around?" What set him off? It wasn't the coffee pot, but that's what you saw. Well, what's his problem? He comes in here, and just because the coffee's out, you can't make some coffee. It's all the things that led up to that. And if you could say, "Hey, man, you know what? You're right. You know what? I'll take care of that," and then that person sits back. Maybe you might get lucky and says, "Hey, look, the only thing these people saw was me getting nasty over some stupid coffee, and he was still nice." That's the kind of the example that we as Christians, that's our job to show that even in the sight of taking a hit. You know what I mean?
I heard I did a sales class years ago, and the guy told basically what you just said. And then at the end of the day, he came home and opened the door, and he said to his wife, "What's for dinner?" And she said, "I haven't cooked dinner yet." And he went over and he kicked the dog. And he said, really would have been better just got up and kicked the dog and had a better day.
But we don't know. All we see is the little tiny few seconds that set someone off. We don't know. I mean,
like seeing
we have bad days.
Like seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Right. You don't know what led up to that, so don't. I would say that as Christians, we shouldn't make them pay for that, and we should also try and do our best to, look past that. People look past my stuff all the time. It's my job to look past theirs too.
It's surprising how much it can help somebody to just not lose your cool. I mean, they're upset, they're getting loud, they're getting angry, but you just maintain your cool. And I've had people who have come back and apologized because of their behavior, and we're glad that I didn't get upset or take it personal, because I realized something else was going on in their life. So just by doing the thing that we're supposed to do, setting the example, can a lot of times help people who are going through a rough spot.
Yeah, I read an article by a psychologist once, and he said that some of the most powerful emotional words that you can say to someone, of course, is "I love you." That carries an incredible weight. But he said almost just as powerful that you can say to someone is "Can I help?" What can I do for you, in other words?
Yeah.
It almost carries the same power as "I love you." Maybe it is saying the same thing.
Another one is "I'm sorry."
Oh yeah.
Just "I'm sorry." I've known families that pride themselves on never being sorry for what they do.
And I would just add, even when it's difficult for you to do it or say it, that's when it's the most useful, and you're being the most forgiving and Christ-like is when you can do it, even when it's difficult for you to do it. You should do it. You should not let that stop you. You should push past that.
In a world where people don't want to get involved, just the simple act of getting involved by saying, "Are you okay? Would you like to talk? Can I help?" Just that little bit. I mean, it may not be anything. You may not have to go out of your way or hold up your day. Just saying those words is enough to give somebody some encouragement to get through a rough spot that they're having.
Right. And as men, just real quick, as men, especially younger men who haven't been on the walking the earth as long as some of us have, you don't have to fix it. Whatever their problem is, they bring to you. You don't have to fix it. You just have to listen to them. I've learned that the hard way a few times. You don't have to fix their problem. You just have to listen to their problem.
One of the hardest lessons I ever had to learn.
Oh yeah, when you get someone bringing you there, the first thing most men think of is, well, how can I fix it? Because that's what we think. Fix it. Give me a wrench. I'll fix that. Well, you can't really fix it, and it's not. They don't expect you to fix it. They at least listen to it. That is a huge weight off of someone just unloading, having someone to unload on.
Be a
That's
sounding
valuable.
board. Just be their sounding board and give them a way to let it go.
Yep.
Just be a good listener, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sympathetic listener. I was thinking that another part of the issue is in Matthew 5, this is something that I think is misunderstood, where Christ talks about the whole issue of turning the other cheek in Matthew 5, and that people often misunderstand it. I'll just read verse 39, but most of us know the whole section. But I say unto you that you resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And then he says, somebody wants to use your coat, give him your cloak. Someone wants to compel you to go a mile, go with him 2 miles. By the way, in those days, the Roman Empire, the soldiers were able to pick a person out of just anyone. That's just the way it was. And they had a mail bag, and they'd say, hey, you, young man, I want you to carry this mail bag for a mile. And they'd pick somebody else. And either you had to do it or else they'd do violence on you. So and of course the Jews resented that, but Christ said, in a sense, he's saying, cooperate with the government, even if it's a little pushy. And a lot of people, I think the problem with the turn the cheek set of scriptures is people look at that and they think that somehow, if it's in the Bible, God is not thinking about common sense. And they don't put the common sense perspective on it. But in the common sense way, what Christ is talking about is personal revenge and being a cooperative citizen by going the extra mile. He's saying that you shouldn't hold grudges, hold hatreds. By the way, there's a statement that was done by Mark Twain. He said the acid you get from hatred does more harm to the container than it does to the person you're going to pour it on. I probably didn't say it as well as Mark Twain did, but the whole point of that is that hatred will eat you up, will hurt your health more than will hurt the person that you're hating. And so what we were thinking is that what people misunderstand, this is not to mean that you can't use self-defense if you're attacked by a thug. You can use self-defense. And it doesn't mean that the police shouldn't go out there and try to arrest the criminals. So I thought we'd turn it over to Dave to see what he has to say.
Okay, if we could go to a couple scriptures I have. Mark 3.
Yeah, this is turn the other cheek. Hope I said that correctly. We're trying to get a better understanding of turn the other cheek.
Oh, better understand turn the other cheek.
In other words, what I mean by it doesn't mean that you should allow yourself to be beaten by criminals.
I understand. Right, we should turn the other cheek if somebody insults you or cuts you off in traffic or jumps in line in front of you or whatever. Those things happen. But we also are not to be here. We're not placed on this earth to be harmed. And so if we go to Mark 3 and verse 23. So Jesus called them and spoke to them in parables. How can Satan drive out Satan if a kingdom is divided amongst itself? I don't know why I wrote that scripture. Maybe it's 27. There we go, verse 27. In fact, no one can enter a strong man's house and carry off his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man. Then he can rob the house. So if a strong man is, if you're stronger than the man coming into your home, you can stop him from doing that. If you go to John 18, John 18 and verse 10. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting his ear off. The servant's name was Malchus. The point I'm making here is that Peter was very close to Jesus, and probably as close, or maybe closer than the others. And after being with Jesus and his disciple for years, he still carried a sword. My point of that being is that he needed that sword to defend himself against robbers or animals or whatever. But also, when you see a person walking with a sword, or today we'd say a gun, if the guy has a gun on, you're going to be more likely to be polite to that person. He creates peace. So I don't think that self-defense, and especially a man protecting his family, is frowned upon by God at all. Years ago, my wife and I were in a motel. It was probably 2, 3 in the morning. I looked up and there was a guy standing at the end of my bed, big guy. And I jumped out of bed and grabbed him and ran him out of the room and bent him over the balcony and explained to him that he wasn't safe. And I went back to bed. The next day, I said to my wife, "You didn't call the police. You didn't want to help." She said, "I'm not getting in the way, and I knew that you could take care of that." And I think as men in the church, we should be strong so that our wives know that they're protected, our children feel safe in their home. I don't believe in bullying anybody by any means or being the aggressor, but you cannot allow someone to harm you either, or your family. I've got grandkids. I love them to death. I would never allow somebody to harm them. And then the last scripture that I have is Romans 13. In verse 1, everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. So we can complain about our leadership around the world and the country and governors or whatever, but they're there for a reason. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. For those who do so will bring judgment upon themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one authority? Then do what is right, and he will commend you. For he is God's servant to do you good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword for nothing. He is God's servant and an agent of wrath to bring punishment upon the wrongdoer. So God places our leaders in position where they are. And the governments of the world are set up to be there by God. God is in control. It's like the story of the little boy who had gone on people had gone on a trip in Peru or something, and they were riding on the bus, and the bus was going crazy and lost its brakes, and they were trying to stop, and everybody was in panic, and finally the bus driver was able to get the bus off side of the road and bring it to a stop, and everybody jumps off the bus, and this one lady runs back on the bus, and there was a little boy laying there asleep, and she picks him up, and she says, "Weren't you afraid?" He says, "Well, no, my dad's driving this bus. He won't hurt me." And we have to place that kind of faith in God.
And by the way, if you didn't have police or the army, you'd have chaos.
You wouldn't have a country. You wouldn't have anything.
But by the way, people look at Matthew 5 and some other places. You have to use common sense. Like when Christ said to cut your hand off to prevent yourself from stealing and sinning in your eye, he was using hyperbole to make a point. That you should go to great efforts to avoid, sinning. And we probably don't go as much as we should. But you realize your hand doesn't steal; it's your heart and your mind that steal. Christ was using hyperbole. People have to use common sense when they look at those scriptures, but sometimes people don't, and that's what we want to. Oh, just a side thought: the Jewish leaders didn't follow Paul's advice. They rebelled against the Roman Empire. Terrible disaster. Big mistake.
Back to a point you just made, I teach classes on loss prevention and that kind of thing. I teach security officers how to do their jobs. And one of the things we do that I tell them is there's 3 steps taken in any crime. First, the thought. You think, hey, I can rob the bank. Next, you test it. You ride around. You look to see if there's an armed guard. You see how the getaways and how many people are in there, how easy will it be to get in and out. And then third, you take the action. But if you can remove the first step, the others will never happen. So if you have an issue in your life of some form of a sin, you got to purge it out of your head. And then the testing and the action won't go.
Yeah.
Good analogy.
I think kind of what we're getting at is, living our lives as examples and being kind and everything doesn't mean to be victims. And the Bible tells us in Matthew 10:16, he was sending them out like sheep among wolves, and he said to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves, and to be wise about the world around you and what's going on, and be aware of things, but be innocent, be repentant and loving and caring towards others. It doesn't mean to get run over. And I think that's what we're trying to get at.
When I first came into the church, one of the ministers told me that a Christian is not called upon to be anyone's doormat. You should stand up for yourself.
Do you hear that, honey?
Gonna be a long night over there.
No, Gary said it. I didn't.
Heat it up for you.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's see. Where else did we want to go? Where else did you want to? What other?
Well, I thought we would talk maybe for a minute or two, just in general, about some of the scams that people try to scam Christians, and I think people need to be aware that.
Oh.
You have to, I don't know. I really don't know all the scams by any means, but I get the feeling that they're scamming us.
The wisest serpent's part.
There's
Go ahead, Kelly.
there's a lot of scams out there, and that's part of the hard part about being a Christian. I had a lady ask me once. She goes, well, what is my responsibility as a Christian in dealing with people and things? And sometimes there's never a complete answer for every situation, because there's different situations and you have to weigh each one. So the best thing to do is have a good foundation. And one of the things I look at is Leviticus 19, verses 9 and 10, says, "And when you reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of thy harvest. And thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of the vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and stranger. I am the Lord your God." So here we have God saying, we are to leave the ability for people who are less fortunate to be able to take care of themselves. And I think that's part of an issue in our country today, is that there's a difference between giving people the ability to help themselves and doing everything for them. And when you take that stand, then people will look at you like, well, you're not loving, or you're intolerant. I mean, how can you say, well, you need to pick yourself up, and things. And so I think you've got to look at a foundation of this. And then in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10, it says, whoever doesn't eat or whoever doesn't work, neither should they eat. So we've got biblical principles here that you can use to build a foundation on how you approach people who are in need. We do have a Christian responsibility to help them, but sometimes helping them hurts them. And you have to understand that. Sometimes you have to say no. Sometimes you have to say, yes, I'll help you, but these are the conditions that I'll help you under. And one of the things that I've seen in my life, and I know in my area, that was a scam for a long time, is that there was people who made a living going from church to church. They would go to the Baptist church one week, and then the next week they'd go to the Methodist church, the next week they'd go to the Catholic church, and all they were doing was just going and getting whatever they could get from these churches. Well, finally the churches started talking to each other and realized, hey, wait a minute. We've had that same people, that same family come by and give us the same story, and we helped them out. And yet then they go to you and tell you the same story. And so they actually formed an association where they put all their resources into one place. And basically, if you want help from any of the local churches, you have to go to that one place. So therefore, they know who it is they've helped and what the circumstances were. And you can't just go from church to church to church. And recently, I had an example of that. I had a man who called me up because of our church, and he was giving me his story of what all was going on. And I told him, I said, well, you know, we're a small church. I don't know that we can really help you. I said, but I'd be more than glad to tell you where some resources are that you can check into that would help you. I ain't got time for that, and hung up on me. Now, to me, if someone really needs help, they'll take any help that they can get. And so, to me, obviously, this man was just in a scam to try and get money from our church because he wasn't interested in me giving him any advice or any way to help himself. And he actually called back several other times, and I kind of told him the same thing. He would just hang up on me again. And so there are scams, and you feel torn because people give you these stories, and you want, well, should I help them or shouldn't I help them? Now, for my own personal thing, which is what I can go by, I usually don't carry a lot of cash on me or anything. And it's not because I'm trying to avoid this, but it's just I just don't carry it on me because I tend to spend it. My wife won't let me have it. So, but in Myrtle Beach, for instance, we were outside of a restaurant. We just got through eating, and I happened to have some cash on me. And this lady came walking up to me and pecked on the window. We were getting ready to leave, and I rolled the window down. She started telling me about her daughter and her son-in-law, that their house had just burnt down, and they were having to stay in a hotel, and that the Red Cross had been helping them, but the help was running out, and they were having trouble with the insurance, getting the insurance claim, and on and on and on. And so they were needing some money for the hotel to be able to continue to stay there. And I forget exactly how much it was, but she said, you know, she goes, I'm about $10 short. I had exactly $10 in my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, whether she was telling me the truth, whether it was a scam or not, I don't know. But I gave it to her, and the way I look at it is, I had it in my pocket. She came up to me, and I look at it like, you know, God put me in front of her. And so, therefore, I had the exact what she wanted. I gave it to her. Whether she was truthful or not, that's on her. And that's that's the best we can do, is trust people to a point, but check up. You know, if there's somebody who continuously wants to keep coming back to the coffers and continue to get money, then, you know, try to help them get in a position to where they don't have to. You know, give them help so that they don't have to keep coming back. I know one of the things is, instead of giving people, never give anybody money that comes up and wants a lot of money for groceries or anything like that. Go to the grocery store, buy them groceries, and give them the groceries. Because one of the scams is they'll take the cash and go buy drugs. So if you buy the groceries, they can't really do that. So you're taking away part of the ability to scam.
I get people come in my business a lot, going asking, you know, if I'm down and out, whatever. And a lot of times I try to find a chore for them to do. You know, wipe my doors down, wipe my cabinets down, and then I'll give them some money. That way they earned it, you know,
right.
And I'm not just handing it to them.
And that's a good way, because some people who are the scammers, when you do that, they'll be like, well, you know, no thank you, and they'll go on somewhere else because they know they'll find somebody who will give them the money and they won't have to do anything for it.
Right, right.
So again, there's an attitude that you can see, and some people say, well, you're judging. Well, you know, I mean, I think you have to. That's part of what I think God's Word teaches us, is you have to look at things and look at what the evidence is you're being given. You know, are they trying? Are they sincerely trying to get out of the situation they're in by taking, you know, advice, or let me help you with this. Let me tell you how you can better yourself. You know, versus, you know, forget it, dude. I ain't got time for you. And, you know, so obviously that person's into a scam. And
I'm in and out of places constantly throughout the day where I, you know, for my job, and one of the biggest scams out there is, my car broke down, I'm just up the road. I need a couple of bucks for gas. They might even have a gas can. My kid's in the car. And, you know, the third, fourth, fifth time you hear that, you kind of, it's something you know that's circulating throughout the area. And that's something around here that we get a lot, is that kind of thing. And I'm going in and out of sites that I go to, I get that sort of thing, and it's usually a couple of bucks. It's almost always five or less that they ask for, or it's just whatever you have or change. But it seems to be mostly the same stories over and over again. I don't know. Sometimes something sets itself apart from the usual routine, and and I'll give them some money. But they usually phrase their spiel in a way you just want to get rid of them. If that's what they're trying to do, extract money from you just to get rid of them, then it's probably a scam.
I had a guy walk up to me 20 some odd years ago with a gas can. He said, I just ran out of gas. I just need a couple of bucks for gas. So I handed him $2. And he goes, $2, that's it? So I said, you know what? I'll take it back. And he goes, I'm sorry. He goes, I'm sorry. So an hour or two later, I'm in another store. He walks up to me at a different store down the road with the gas can and says, hey, I ran out of gas, and I'm just down. I said, I just gave you $2. I said, you're ripping people off, so give me my $2 back. And he took off running.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, last year we as a church made a donation to an institution called Forgotten Harvest. That's another way to go about it. Forgotten Harvest is a well-known high-integrity organization who has a structure in place to screen people, and they know exactly who they're giving it to and helping. So that's another way to do it. We'll probably do that again this year sometime.
Right. And you know, that group, that one you got down south with, we did at Myrtle Beach, that Helping Hands, that was an excellent. Why don't you tell them how they operate?
Helping Hand, what they do is they actually, when you come into them for help, they give you the help, but it's under conditions. They set you up a budget and show you how to budget and work with you. I think it's 6 months they will work with you, helping you, and by the end of that 6 months, you're expected to be able to move on and be able to take care of yourself, because they're giving you all the tools that you need. So it's not just, here's a handout, come back later. It's, we're going to help you, and we're going to give you the tools you need to better your life and pick yourself up and move on. And I was pretty impressed with that philosophy, because I hadn't heard of a charity that was that way, that actually, worked with people to get them past the point where they needed the charity.
I like that premise. It's actually, that's really helping someone. Just giving someone everything they want is not helping them.
Right.
It's helping them get not to need help anymore. It helps them. Teaching them to fish rather than giving them a fish is what actually helps people. And our country has gotten away with that. They've gotten away from that because, by actually giving them the fish means you can get a vote. And instead of giving them the dignity to learn how to fend for themselves, you don't get votes for that.
Well, it's become generational too.
Yeah.
It's not. This is the first generation. These people are being raised this way, raising their kids that way because they were raised that way.
Right.
And that's where the harm comes in. It hurts more than it helps. So you're not helping people like that. You're hurting them. So you're doing more hurt than you are helping.
And it creates hopelessness. The people, they have hope when you tell them you got to do it on your own. Well, then they try to start thinking, and all of a sudden they make something happen. It gives them hope and dignity.
Yep. Well, is there anything else?
I just mentioned real briefly in the 1930s, people were so moral, the government knew they couldn't give handouts. That's why they had those make-work programs.
People didn't want free. They if you tried to give them something free, they wouldn't take it. I mean, they were that proud. People had pride in being decent. Maybe not to a fault, but pride, as being, a decent person. For the large part, society they lost that bit, and I'll take my free whatever and give me more. You should give me more.
Yeah, you owe it to me kind of attitude.
Yeah.
Where and also, as we said before, people should volunteer for all kinds of things like food banks, local schools, nursing homes, and anyway, I thought we had a great discussion this evening.
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
I would like to add one thing. I know sometimes it's hard and people struggle with, what should I do? I firmly believe that God will always show you what it is that you need to do, and you'll know it without a doubt if you trust that. And pray every day that if something comes in front of you, that God gives you the wisdom to be able to do the right thing. And I think if you do that and trust in God, then you'll always know just what your responsibility is and how far to go.
Yep. Yep. All right. Well, thank everybody for watching. Everybody stay warm. Be kind of difficult. What's that?
I'll try.
Oh yeah, Mr.
Yeah.
degrees. Yeah, a cold snap down there. It's 75 degrees. We don't want to talk to you. All right. Well, good night, everybody. Thank you for watching, and remember, always seek the kingdom first. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.